Have you ever felt so exhausted from carrying everyone else's pain that you forgot what your own heart feels like? Carl Jung discovered that empaths face an impossible choice. Keep sacrificing yourself for others until you dissolve completely, or choose peace and face the guilt of feeling selfish. The friends who call you cold, the family who says you've changed, the voice inside that whispers you're abandoning everyone. But Jung found that this guilt is the guardian of your transformation, that choosing peace isn't betrayal. It's the death of a role you were forced to play. And without making this choice, you'll spend your life as a mirror for others, while your own soul withers in silence. The empath is not born from pure kindness. Jung understood it emerges from necessity, a survival strategy forged in childhood. You learned early that peace came only when you absorbed the storms of others, that your needs didn't matter as much as keeping everyone else calm, that your worth was measured by how much you could carry. This wasn't love. It was adaptation to an environment where your emotional survival depended on becoming a mirror. Jung called this the archetypal wound made flesh. You thought sensitivity was your gift, but it was actually your defense. The only way a powerless child could feel safe in an unpredictable world. And now, decades later, you're still carrying what never belonged to you. Your body grows weary, your heart tired of housing pain that isn't yours. This is your psyche beginning to rebel, the unconscious preparing you for a choice that can no longer be avoided. You meet the same faces in different masks, the same betrayals in different voices, the same people who demand your endless sacrifice. Jung called this the law of recurrence, the compulsion to repeat until the soul finally learns what it forgot. And what you forgot is simple. You are not responsible for the storms others create. When you dream, perhaps you see water. It floods the house. You're drowning. You're desperately trying to rescue others from the waves. Jung understood these aren't random images. This is your unconscious crying out, showing you that you're submerged, not in your own emotions, but in the collective tide of everyone around you. The water isn't yours, yet you drink from it as if it were your lifeblood. If you interpret the dream only as fear, you miss its power. The dream is a mirror whispering that you must rise above the flood, that you must find the dry land of your own soul. The archetype of the savior haunts the empath. To feel deeply is to imagine you can redeem those who are broken. But what you call redemption often becomes drowning. You don't rescue the other, you sink with them. And then the unconscious punishes you with resentment, with exhaustion, with a bitterness that corrodes the very compassion that once defined you. You think you're failing at love. But Jung saw something different. You're being summoned toward individuation, the process where the self must separate from the illusions it's been living. Peace is not a simple choice. It's a tearing apart, a death of an old identity. The empath who chooses peace is withdrawing from the compulsion to save, from the archetype of martyrdom, from the shadow contracts that once defined their worth. And this withdrawal feels like betrayal. You fear that without sacrifice you won't be loved, that without carrying the wounds of others you'll no longer belong. But Jung saw this fear for what it truly is, not the voice of truth, but the echo of childhood, the ghost of a forgotten night when your tears were silenced, when your needs were swallowed so that others might continue unchallenged. To choose peace is to choose death, death of an image, death of a role, death of the savior complex that's been running your life. And yet from this death comes resurrection. When you no longer carry the burden of others, you finally feel the weight of your own soul. And it's heavy. But it's real. You discover that beneath the endless storms of everyone else, there was always a still place within you, a temple untouched by chaos. Jung called it the center of wholeness. To find it is to realize that peace was never given by others. It was always born from within. When the empath finally chooses peace over people, something strange happens. At first, the outer world rebels. Friends accuse you of selfishness. Family members call you cold. Lovers say you're distant. They don't recognize that you're undergoing transformation. And transformation threatens the contracts by which they once bound you. This is what Jung called the crucifixion of the empath. You're nailed by misunderstanding, by rejection, by the wrath of those who depended on your endless sacrifice. And yet, in this crucifixion lies the path to resurrection. If you endure the loneliness of peace, you'll awaken to a new kingdom within. Jung once analyzed a woman's dream. She carried a heavy basket of stones on her back, walking through a forest bent double beneath the weight. Each stone bore the face of someone she knew: her mother, her father, her husband, her children. At last, she collapsed, unable to go further. As she fell, the stones spilled onto the ground, and to her amazement, they began to grow roots, to sprout into trees, to rise into a forest of life. She realized she'd been carrying not stones, but seeds. And they were never meant to remain on her back. They needed to be planted. Do you see? The empath's burden, when laid down, becomes life. Not only for yourself, but for others. By refusing to carry, you give back to others the weight that was always theirs to bear. And in doing so, you allow them to grow. This is what Jung meant when he said that your greatest act of compassion might be refusing to rescue. Because carrying for others keeps them dependent. It prevents their own transformation. Peace is not withdrawal from love. Peace is love, purified of compulsion. When you no longer help others because you must, you begin to help because you can. No longer is your gift poisoned by resentment or exhaustion. You give from fullness, not from lack. And this is the paradox Jung identified. When the empath finally chooses peace over people, they become capable of true love for the first time. Yet the path is narrow. The shadows are fierce. The archetype of guilt rises like a dragon, whispering that you've betrayed your nature. But guilt is often the guardian of transformation. It appears to test your courage, to ensure you're ready to pass through the threshold. Do not run from the guilt. Face it. Ask it questions. Whose voice is this? Who told me that to rest is selfish? Who convinced me that my worth depends on my sacrifice? You'll find the answer in forgotten rooms of your childhood, in silent moments when your needs were dismissed, when your tears made others uncomfortable. And when you see the origin, the guilt begins to dissolve, because you realize it was never your own voice. It was the shadow of another living inside you. Jung called this internalized oppression. When you police yourself with the voices of those who once controlled you, the choice for peace is a sacred rebellion. It's the moment the empath ceases to be a servant of others' shadows and begins to serve the self, the divine center within. Jung called it individuation. The mystics called it union with God. The alchemists called it the sacred marriage. Whatever the name, it's the same mystery. The return to wholeness. But this decision doesn't arrive in a single thunderclap. It creeps in silently, as though the soul begins to whisper truths the conscious mind can no longer ignore. At first, you feel vague unease. Conversations that once seemed necessary now leave a bitter aftertaste. Friendships that once felt warm now demand more than they give. Your body rebels with fatigue. Your spirit grows dim after hours of attending to others. This is not random exhaustion. It's your psyche's protest, the unconscious insisting that the drama must end, that you cannot forever be the vessel for another's poison. When you finally see that your empathy has been hijacked by archetypal forces, the martyr, the savior, the scapegoat, you stand at the threshold of liberation. But liberation demands that you betray the role you once played, and betrayal is always terrifying. The collective resists this awakening. Society glorifies the giver, the martyr, the one who bends. We canonize those who sacrifice and condemn those who choose solitude. The empath is doubly imprisoned by the inner shadow and by outer morality. But remember, morality is often a mask for the collective's fear of transformation. The world doesn't want you to awaken because your awakening threatens its contracts. When you no longer comply, others must face their own shadows, their own responsibilities. And so they accuse you, not because you're wrong, but because you're dangerous. Do not be deceived by their outrage. Every accusation is an unconscious confession. When they call you selfish, it's their own unacknowledged selfishness speaking. When they call you cold, it's their own repressed coldness revealed. To choose peace is to become a mirror, and mirrors are always feared. Jung said that people will do anything to avoid facing their own souls, and your refusal to carry them forces them into that confrontation. Your act of peace becomes revolutionary, not only for yourself, but for the entire web of relations around you. Consider how Christ often withdrew to the mountains, leaving behind multitudes who clamored for healing. He said no to the demands of kings, priests, even friends. In the end, he was crucified not for what he gave, but for what he refused to surrender, his connection to the divine center. True compassion flows not from endless sacrifice, but from union with your own wholeness. To choose peace is to finally rescue yourself, to become the parent your inner child always needed, to stop outsourcing your salvation to the suffering of others. The alchemists described this stage as the nigredo, the blackening, the dark night of the soul. It's the moment when old structures collapse, when your identity as savior, martyr, empath disintegrates. It feels like death because it is death, the death of an old psychic form. But in this blackness lies the seed of transformation. From nigredo comes albedo, the whitening, the first taste of peace. You awaken to mornings unburdened, to silences that no longer terrify you, to relationships that no longer define your worth. The soul begins to glow, not from borrowed fires of others, but from its own hidden flame. Peace is not a permanent state, but a continual choice. Again and again, you'll be tempted to return to old patterns. Again and again, faces will appear that call forth your old compulsion. But now you'll see them differently. You'll recognize the archetypal pull, the shadow's demand, and you'll pause. In that pause lies your freedom. To pause is to choose consciously, no longer enslaved by unconscious repetition. This is the heart of individuation, to bring into light what once ruled you from the dark. When the empath finally chooses peace over people, they don't cease to love. They begin to love truly. They no longer give from fear. They no longer rescue to avoid abandonment. They give because love overflows. Because peace makes generosity effortless. This love doesn't bind. It liberates. It doesn't possess. It blesses. And this is the paradox the world cannot understand, that by withdrawing from its demands, you return with a love purer than it has ever known. When you finally stop pouring yourself into others, you discover your own soul was waiting all along. What you sought in people was never theirs to give. It was always within you. The empath who chooses peace discovers that solitude is not loneliness, but fullness. You are no longer a survival role. You are whole. The martyr falls. The sage rises. You no longer live as the echo of others, but as the voice of your own center. Choose peace, Every day, when guilt whispers, when the world demands your collapse, write in the comments, "I choose peace."